Excuse me. Well, good morning, everybody. It is the 10th of February. Had to think for a moment there. To turn that off for a second. All right. Politics in the coming post-pandemic era. Big title. We know that within the next year or so, the pandemic will be a thing of the past. It won't be forgotten anytime soon, obviously. And let's just hope it is gone in a little over a year or so. Hopefully sooner than that, we hope. But my thing is, we have to start realizing that the pandemic has exploded a lot of rifts in society. It's exposed a lot of fractures in American society that need to be addressed and need to be addressed pretty seriously, because what we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is a very difficult situation that, if not resolved properly, is just going to make things even worse. For 40 years, we've been taught that government was the problem, not the solution. The reason we've been taught this lesson is not because people were interested in a better government or anything like that, or they never really believed that smaller government's better government. They have an idea that the term too big to fail became a thing. And we haven't learned that because they took unnecessary risks. They broke the law before the law was they would have broken the law had the law not been rescinded to begin with. There was a reason these laws were put into place. We never listened to that. We never learned that there's a reason why laws are there to begin with. It's to keep abuses from happening. But for some reason, we tend to think that, well, Reagan said that government's bad. What are we replacing government with? And that's the reason we're here where we're at today. Government is not business. I agree, government should balance the budget. But government cannot be run like a business because government is not a business. Government is supposed to do the things that we as individual citizens or small groups of citizens cannot do for ourselves. Or it would not be in the public interest for private. It puts the lie to what they've been saying for decades. That private sectors are better than government. Now, I'm going to say this: poorly run government without oversight and without proper auditing techniques can be bad, just like a bad company that cooks the books. And we've seen that. And privately well-run private companies that have public oversight can do well too. The problem is that we've begun to over-rely on this idea the private sector is so much better than the government. Where now the private sector has had plenty of abuses. Take charter schools, for example. A good idea when they were nonprofit, when they were run in the interest of improving education, and allowing children that didn't have access to as good of an education because of a lack of resources, and I'll get back to that in a little bit, because there's a reason why I think that governments have been starving school systems for a long time. But they changed when nonprofit charters started becoming for-profit charters. Now you're saying to yourself, well, private sectors do really, really good at things. The problem is that's not always the case. And it's becoming more and more evident, especially when you look at the idea that you want to spend minimum resources to get maximum return. And that's what they want. They want to spend minimum resources to get as much money as they can. And if it means basically giving your child a substandard education and fudging the numbers, they'll do it. And it's been done. This isn't, some shoddy business that may not be giving you the best food for your money. This is your child's education. And you're trusting it to someone who may only be interested in money and not giving your child a proper education. But because you have been convinced by people with an agenda to undermine the public education system, that the public education system is flawed. And there are flaws in the public education system. I'll go ahead and tell you that. But it's not just because of the idea of a public education system. It's because we haven't paid teachers what they deserve. We haven't given the resources we need to ensure our children get a proper education. And we are not trying to make sure that education is equal no matter if you're in a rich district or a poor district. Because of this stupid asinine idea that, local government is the best government. And it should triumph over everybody. Here's the thing. I've lived in this area for a long time. I can tell you local government ain't that great. Unless they're doing things you want it to do. That's not necessarily for the public good. I can tell you a lot of things that local government around here should be doing, but either they're not, or they're dragging their feet big time because they want you to make you think they're actually doing something. But there's other things coming along. But their pet projects are more important than actually building an economy. The federal government shouldn't be the end-all, be-all. It shouldn't have micromanage state government or local governments, but it should have an influence in making sure that state governments provide resources as equally and as fairly as possible. And the state government should make sure local governments are doing the exact same thing. And if local governments are not able to do that because they don't have the tax revenue and all that, or their economy is bad, and they're trying to, let's say there's been a major plant closure and the tax base is taking a hit, the state government should come in and help out from time to time to make sure that the education system is maintained, that basic services are maintained. But in the post-pandemic era, what does that mean? What does it mean? Very simply put, is I think we're going to get away from this idea that the private sector is better than the government sector. That I think we're going to return to the post-war idea that government can do a lot of good. It's going to be a very high up-road battle because up until World War II, there was the very same thinking that government shouldn't do what groups of individuals should do for themselves. The problem with that thinking is that groups of people will do things that may very well be in the detriment to the entire community. or the detriment to particular people in the community, i.e. minorities or the poor. I see big government making a comeback in the post-pandemic era. And they're going to make their case because of the way that the Trump administration has handled the pandemic. And if you look at it, they have an excellent case for it because Trump took away the resources that Obama and Bush had set together to avoid the very thing we're in right now. Or at the very least, temper it to the point where the economy would not take the bath that it's taking and that we would not have to be borrowing money left and right for these bailouts for these major corporations. Oh yeah, they sent you a $1,200 check last spring. They sent you a $600 check about a month ago. And you might be getting another $1,400 check. Wowie, whatever that the Fiend says on, Bray Wyatt says on Raw. Yowie wowie, that's what it is. Other governments have sent monthly payments to help people survive the pandemic that have been out of work, or at the very least to stay home and to pay, help small businesses survive. If you look at what these bailouts have done, is they've not helped small businesses as much as they have helped out big corporations that didn't need the help. That didn't really need the help. And if they did need the help, it was because they threatened to go, well, if I don't get the money, I'm going to lay all these people off. Not because I can't afford to pay them, but because if I had to afford to pay them, I'd have to cut back on the dividend on my shareholders and such. And that's why I have said for years and decades that the fact that Wall Street is the engine of our economy has been to the detriment of our economy because it has kept wages artificially low. Their undue influence in our government has kept wages low, benefits low. Think about this. Why is it that almost everyone I talk to that have been that's my age, that have been working for a company for a long period of time, says this all the time? They're paying more for their benefits and getting less out of them. Almost unanimously. When you pay more for something, you should be getting more out of it. Or at the very least, you're paying more for something that stays the same. Because prices inevitably go up. Instead, we're paying more for less coverage. But you got to have health insurance. You ever wonder about that? And people complain about Medicare for all. They don't want to pay for somebody else's. You're already doing it. Have you ever heard of group health coverage? If you're in a healthcare plan at work, guess what? You're paying for it. If you're a self-employed person or you own a small business and you pay into an insurance, guess what? You're already paying for somebody's else. It's just that you're also paying for somebody's profit. You have been finagled into believing that private industry is just catering to you. No, they're not. You're paying what you would pay anyway for government-funded, taxpayer-funded health care. It's just on top of that, there's a profit margin, a profit motive. They keep cost up, quality down, quantity down, because it's all about making money. How many people do you know have been told we can't cover that because it would be too expensive? Or we can cover that, but you can get the surgery, but you've got to raise X amount of dollars into the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars first before you can have the surgery. We are the only industrialized nation that does this. Every other country has nationalized health care. Is it perfect? No. But when you need something, if you are, and the great lie is that is propagated by private healthcare industries for some odd reason. Do they have a reason for doing that? I wonder. Why is it Canadians think very highly of their nationalized healthcare system, despite its flaws? Same with England and Britain. Same with every other major industrialized country that has nationalized healthcare. It isn't perfect. It could be better. But they still like it because, unlike us, they don't get those huge medical bills. They're not having to wonder how they're going to pay for an important surgery their child needs, or their parent needs, or their spouse needs. We have bought into the lie that the private sector does things better than government automatically. On some things, yeah, they can. When it comes to providing for grocery stores, absolutely, private industry is much better at that. General retail goods, absolutely, the private sector is much better at that. But essential services like, like water should be government regulated. Because if you have multiple competing water companies, they're going to try to undercut each other, and they're going to want to cut cost and cut corners. And even now, when you have monopolies like Duke Power and Blue Ridge Water Authority, or Broad River Water Authority, they're monopolies. They're basically private companies that have a mandate to provide coverage over a certain area. Now, in the case of Duke Power, it's not entirely a monopoly. There are, I think, 2 other companies that provide, but it depends about where you live at. You can't simply choose one company. If you live in where I live at, you have to deal with Rutherford Electric Cooperative. Electric Cooperative, I think that's the name of it. I can't remember. The reason for that is very simple. It's because they can charge whatever they want to. Now, that has to be tempered with the fact that every so often that legal monopoly comes up for review by the local authorities. But very rarely does that legal monopoly get overturned. And usually the only time that happens is A, there have been such abuses or such neglect of the system that they have no other choice but to do it. And that has to be like really, really bad to where the media and the public are up in arms over it. Or there's a better deal. The company comes in with a better deal, and even then, there's usually shenanigans going on. But the post-pandemic era is going to see a return of big government. The taxes for the rich are going to go up. They're going to pay their fair share once again, as they haven't been doing for nearly 40 years now. And we're going to see a return of government actually being proactive at things, like with infrastructure. We have neglected our infrastructure for 40 years. You complain about the highways, you complain about the constant road work. The problem is we have been basically patching things up that we really should be doing a major overhaul over. The modern highway system that we have in this country and its subsidiaries came about in the 1950s thanks to Dwight Eisenhower's highway program. Interstate program, I should say. Now, truth be told, Eisenhower was a Republican, and the main reason for this was due to the fact that he was concerned about nuclear war. And if there was a nuclear war, people would need to evacuate the East Coast to get to the center of the country. This is before ICBMs became a thing. There was a real concern that bombers from Russia could hit the East Coast and West Coast. So in order to prepare for that, to evacuate people, these massive interstate systems were created. There's a reason many of them go to the center of the country, because it's to get as many people to the center of the country as possible to avoid the East Coast and West Coast being populations being decimated in the millions and millions and millions. Now, ICBMs have pretty much taken that and made it irrelevant. But the side benefit of that is it's created a massive amount of interstate commerce. It's allowed for major corporations to grow and explode. If it weren't for the Eisenhower interstate system, Walmart would not have grown nearly as big as it has. It would still be a small chain of stores in Arkansas, and maybe Missouri, and Oklahoma, and Texas, and Louisiana, possibly. But if you understood what the roads were like back before the interstate system was developed, it took you several days to get across the country. Now, you reasonably could get across the country with rest stops in 3 days. And if you do it like many truckers do, you can get across in less than 2. Because of the interstate system. One of the things I'd love to do before I die, it's on my bucket list, is to start at I-40 in Wilmington, North Carolina, and go all the way across the country to where I-40 ends in, I believe it's Bakersfield, California. It doesn't entirely go all the way to LA. I do know it ends in Bakersfield because I've looked at it on a map. You could conceivably go around the country in a week. 2 days across country, 1.5 up the Pacific coast, 2 days across country of the north, 1.5 down the east coast, maybe 2. Because I think the east coast is technically longer than the west coast, depending on where you start at. You could reasonably circumnavigate the entire country in a week, or you could literally go cross country within a regular business week. Go from North Carolina all the way to California and back within a business week. That's crazy. And it wasn't private industry that did that, it's public investment. We once had the best healthcare system. We once had the best public education system. The reason they've gone downhill is because we haven't invested in them the way we once did. And that is the problem, ladies and gentlemen. That has been the problem, ladies and gentlemen. So in a post-pandemic era, you're going to see that reinvestment. That means higher taxes for the rich. That does not mean higher taxes for regular working folks like you and me. That does mean the minimum wage is going to go up for the very simple reason that economists, even conservative economists, say it's time for the minimum wage to go up. Now, whether or not it should go up to $15 an hour, that's another point. But remember this, during the presidential campaign of 2016, even Donald Trump himself said that the minimum wage should go up to $10 an hour. It never happened, of course, but he did state that on multiple occasions, that he supported a minimum wage hike of $10, and I believe even a couple of times he said as high as $11. The reason I support this is very simple. If you look at the way the economy from the post-war of 1945 to 1980, wages went up along the same lines as the cost of living adjustments and productivity. 1980, 81, when Reagan took office, productivity continued to skyrocket, the cost of living continued to skyrocket, wages stagnated. What your parents made probably put more food on the table than what you make right now to put food on your children's table. As prices have gone up, wages have stagnated, and that's according to if you account for inflation. You're saying, well, I make twice as much or 3 times as much as my parents did. Look at what prices were in 1980 compared to what they are now. They're a lot higher. Depending on which study, had the minimum wage continued to grow the way it was before Reagan came along, the minimum wage would be anything from $16 an hour to $22 an hour, depending on which study. So putting it at 15 would right the balance. Now, will some businesses fall under because of that? Sure. They always do. But the reason for that is not necessarily because of higher wages, because they were riding. Anything could have taken those businesses out. A natural disaster. A major change in the economy that had nothing to do with wage increases. So this excuse that raising minimum wage would kill businesses, the truth of the matter is those businesses were vulnerable already to begin with. Businesses can go under for a variety of reasons. Should we allow our macroeconomic future to be dictated by private industries, a particular part of our private industry? You can make the case that we have suffered economically because of the fact that we have depressed wages for 40 years. They haven't grown the way they should have grown, the way they were growing from 1945 to 1980. And up until the instability of the 70s, and it wasn't all entirely bad, but there were some issues that happened. The problem was We spent a lot of money in the Vietnam War. We had a lot of domestic instability that caused a lot of economic instability. And right now we have a lot of domestic instability, and as well as our economy is unstable. There are people who don't understand that history changes, the economy changes. What worked 40 years ago or 60 years ago or 80 years ago does not work now. 50 years ago, the textile industry in the United States of America was a very powerful factor, especially in the South. Now, it's not. It hasn't been that way for at least 25 years. The reason for that, cheaper international competition, because of free trade agreements. But the problem is, even without free trade, this was happening anyway. Because even with tariffs, even with all this, countries like China, like Indonesia, like Malaysia, like Vietnam, we're starting to make inroads into our economy by providing cheaper goods, maybe not as good of a quality of goods as we had in the United States. People talk about, well, they want to buy American. Well, the problem is you can't afford to buy American anymore because A, many of those goods aren't even made in America anymore, and those that are made are actually more expensive, even though they don't pay their people the wage they deserve to be paid. The reason for that is your own wages are down. Your wages, even though you're not making minimum wage, you may be making twice the minimum wage. You may be making 3 times the minimum wage. But your wages aren't growing the way that they should have. Prices continue to rise despite the fact, the very argument that people make, well, if you raise the minimum wage $15 an hour, then the price for Taco Bell burrito is going to be $12. No. The price of that burrito has been going up anyway because we've not raised the minimum wage since the Bush administration. We have had 2 hikes in the minimum wage in 30 years. One during the Clinton administration, one during the George W. Bush administration. We did not have one during the Obama administration. We did not have one during the Trump administration. That's 12 years without a minimum wage hike. Now, to be truthful, those 2 hikes were rather substantial. But, and there were some businesses that did go under, but not nearly as many as feared. And in that wake, more businesses were created. In the end, the economy eventually grew. The only reason that we had the issues in the Bush administration was because the economy collapsed because of the problems with the sub-mortgage industry that are well documented. Raising the minimum wage had nothing to do with that. When Clinton raised the minimum wage along with Congress, the economy, in a couple of years after that, the economy collapsed, not because of the minimum wage increase, but because of the dot-com era collapse. That had nothing to do with the minimum wage hike. Raising the minimum wage will not kill the economy. Yes, some businesses will suffer. And that sucks. But those businesses could possibly be knocked over because of a natural disaster, like I said earlier, or a change in something that is completely out of the possibilities of, like with right now, we have gas prices going up because of some instability in our government. Speculators are jacking up the price of oil, and they're anticipating a less of a supply of oil because of what's going on. It's gone from around here locally, it was below $2. Now it's like $2.25 locally. But you notice what I said, speculators, Wall Street. Why is it that we didn't have these problems until we started deregulating the oil industry? Basically allowing speculators to set the price instead of traditional supply and demand. That's the problem. During the W administration, gas prices went up to nearly $4 a gallon. During the Obama administration, they stayed around $2.50. There's a reason for that. Now let me stress, presidents don't have direct control over price increases and whatnot. There were times during the Bush administration it did stay around $2.50. But if you look at the history, when it was deregulated, prices went up. When it was re-regulated during the Obama administration, prices stabilized and went down and stayed down. During the Trump era, for that first term, give the devil his due, they stayed relatively stable, all things considered, compared to what they were during the Bush administration. The main reason was that Trump didn't always like Wall Street, and Wall Street didn't always like him. Like I said, I give the devil his due. The problem was Trump wanted to go further than Wall Street did. And Trump didn't exactly... There's a lot of ways we could go about that. But, and that's a conversation for another time, about how Wall Street didn't necessarily like everything Trump did, but there are some things they did like. That was a very complicated relationship, to say the least. But let's get back to what's going to happen in the post-pandemic era. You're going to see more government oversight. You're going to see a move away from speculative activity on Wall Street to going back to the traditional supply and demand. Gas prices will stabilize. They won't go down as fast, but they won't go up as fast. I can see gas prices stabilizing around $2 a gallon to $2.25 a gallon. Depending on circumstances, they may go down, but they won't go down quickly, but they won't go up as fast. It's a crazy thing about our economy. People complain about government regulations. The problem is we don't have the government regulations that other countries do, like Canada, like Great Britain, like Australia, like Europe. And sure, you could make an argument that the European Union is too regulatory. But there's a reason for that. That's what they want. But to a degree, maybe it's not as good as it should be. It's striking the balance. And that's the hard part when you're trying to strike the balance between what's good for the individual, good for the small businesses and local communities, and what's good for the nation as a whole. Striking the balance between the microeconomic interest and the macroeconomic interest. And for too long, we've been focused too much on the microeconomic interest and not the nation as a whole. We've been too focused on making sure private industries are taken care of and talking about major corporations, which is part of in a way, a macroeconomic thing, but they're only a small part of the macroeconomic thing. And what we're seeing right now are people who are in the coal industry, the oil and gas industry, know their industries are becoming extinct. Not just because of climate change, but because their resources are running out. And we've known this. They may not run out in my lifetime, they may not run out in my niece's lifetime. But they are finite resources. And as those resources start running out, or it becomes harder to find those resources, prices go up. They may go up dramatically. We've been warned about this. That there may come a day when we can't find any more oil. We can't find any more natural gas. We can't find any more coal. Or we can't find it without ruining the world climate. We can't find it unless we are willing to risk going into wildlife preserves. What are we willing to pay? The problem is, if we listen to mob mentality, we're willing to throw everything away for very short-term gain, when in reality we should be focused on what our children and children's children will be dealing with. It's too tempting to focus on just what we want right now, because down the road it may ruin it for everybody in the future. All right. To wrap this up, and I've been going on and on and on and on. Big government's coming back. That means lots of spending, but you're going to see companies, corporations paying more taxes. Their tax loopholes are going to be gone. Tax havens are going to be gone. Because the simple fact is that's the reason why our economy has suffered. We've been starving government to feed private industry, to feed private businesses. And they haven't, this idea that supply-side economics would pay off, the trickle-down theory hasn't paid off. It's hurt us far more than it's helped us. Far, far more than it's helped us. And the reckoning has come. We're finding out our system isn't as good as we thought it was. It's not as good as we were told it was. And we can look at other countries. We have information we can easily get from other countries now, thanks to the internet. We can compare it to Australia and Canada and Germany and other nations that are industrial and free just like us. We realize that, we don't have the right solution for this. So, things are going to change. You may not like them. You may not like them now. You may like them down the road. But things have to change because it can't continue like this. Because, yes, this pandemic will probably be gone within a year or so. Maybe sooner, maybe not that soon. What about the next time? What if it's something completely different? What if something is more deadlier? That's the thing we have to contemplate. Governments are not businesses. They shouldn't be run like them. And for 40 years we've been told government should run like a business. But the problem is, governments are not supposed to bring in a profit. They're supposed to provide services that we ourselves can't provide. or that we can't provide ourselves that could be affordable. That's why we had public education. That's why up until 1973, the year of my sister's birth, we had a non-profit healthcare system, which is why my sister paid far more for my niece's birth than my mom ever paid for my birth and my sister's birth when you prorate it for inflation. It's not even close. My mom got a bargain, and so did many other moms. Because the truth we're finding out is that the promises we were made 40 years ago that the private sector would do so much better than the government were lies. The problem was the fact is not that government is the problem, not the solution. The problem was we didn't realize the real problem was inefficient, corrupt, unregulated, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, government's not non-oversight government. Okay? With properly run government that is accountable, truly accountable to the people, it can do amazing things. When you have a government that's hiding things from the people, when they go out of their way to hide things from the people, that's when you get corruption. And more often than not, who's behind that attempt to hide things? Republicans. Look at Nixon, look at Reagan, look at George W. Bush, look at Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that you didn't see some of the things from Clinton and in some degrees Obama. But the major part of that, kind of hiding that away from the media, and that also means public speculation. Here's the thing. Why is it the framers of our Constitution went to such great lengths to protect freedom of the press, but yet Trump, George Herbert W. Bush, and Reagan, along with Nixon, and before that, Joseph McCarthy, attacked the media? Why? Because they didn't want that oversight. The media is supposed to be the oversight. And if you don't want to have that oversight, how do you keep that oversight from getting onto you? You poison the well. You make people doubt about the media. Now, I'm not saying the media is perfect. I could go on a rant, and I have gone on rants about the media in the past. And I probably will again on this very podcast. Maybe even as soon as tomorrow, about what I really think about the media. It's important to understand that in the post-pandemic era that's coming up, either by the end of this year or by the first of next year, or maybe as late as the middle of next year, that the way things have gone on before can't continue on, because we have seen what the pandemic has brought out is the fractures that were already there in society. It's just they were brought out even more. Wars, natural disasters can bring out the best in us. It can also bring out the worst in us. It's like a magnifying glass on society. Had it not been for the pandemic, I don't think you would have seen the storming of the Capitol. You would still have had Trump lose the election, in my opinion. He would have still done a lot of what he did, but you wouldn't have had the pressure cooker that the pandemic put us in. And I think I'm going to go and on another topic one of these days, talking about just how the pandemic has kind of been like a pressure cooker for American society. it's compressed things and feelings and emotions that we didn't have before. We were able to kind of escape it to a certain degree because we had escape valves. When we were stuck in our homes and we were stuck, everything was magnified because we didn't have the distractions. Even though we had distractions on the television screen, not many people wanted to just sit there on the television screen. We had social media and all that to deal with it. So, it's not a rosy picture I'm painting of the post-pandemic era. I'm just saying things will be changing. How dramatic those changes will be remains to be seen. But there will be changes. This is coming. This is common. A thread throughout history. Well, I'm going to end the podcast here. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope I made you think, enlightened you to a certain degree. I'm sure you probably disagree with some of what I said. That's perfectly fine. That's your opinion. I have an opinion. Everybody's an opinion like everybody's got an opinion like everybody's got a All right. That's it for now. As we like to say here, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.